A phone alarm keeps ringing without pause. It is 7 a.m. inside a modest house on Husky Drive, Newfoundland, and a teenage girl traces the noise into her mother's bedroom. The bed stands empty. Her phone remains there, vibrating on the nightstand. Her purse remains. Her coat remains. Her shoes, passport, and car keys remain too. Everything a woman would normally take when leaving the house by herself is still there. Nothing has been taken. Jennifer Hillier Penny is the only one missing. For 7 years, no one was ever arrested. For 7 years, her family covered the town with posters, gathered for vigils, and pleaded with the little fishing community not to forget her name. Then, nearly a decade later, a jury in a Newfoundland courtroom there listened as the person closest to her, her husband, explained in his own recorded voice precisely how she died. This is Jennifer Hillier Penny's story. Stay with me, because the operation that ultimately broke this case open ranks among the strangest, most intricate police investigations you will ever hear about. Jennifer was raised in St. Lunaire Grey Cay, a tiny seaside community on Newfoundland's Great Northern Peninsula, one of Canada's most isolated and windswept corners. She was one of 7 children in the Hillier household, raised by her father, Alan, within a family that people who knew them personally described as close-knit, warm, affectionate, and loving. Public records give her date of birth as December 28, 1977. Friends recalled her as blonde, green-eyed, and distinguished by a small physical feature that made her immediately recognizable to the people around her. One leg was slightly shorter than the other due to a childhood illness that was never publicly identified, leaving her with a mild limp that those who loved her eventually stopped noticing because it was simply Jennifer. Jennifer met Dean Penny while attending high school in that small town. He would eventually become her husband, the father of her children, and the central figure in almost all of her adult life. Their relationship began when they were young, and it continued for years. Eventually, they relocated about 20 kilometers away to St. Anthony, a somewhat larger regional center with a population of only a few thousand people, and settled into married life. In time, they had 2 daughters, Marina and Dina, and created a home together on a street named Husky Drive. Very little information has ever been published about Jennifer's education or her early goals. There is also no public indication that she attended college or received specialized professional training beyond her employment at the hospital. The available public record of her early years is sparse, which helps explain why so much of her identity has been reconstructed through the people who loved her. What is certain is that Dean was not merely a brief high school romance. He became, quite literally, the person she spent nearly her entire adult life beside. Jennifer worked at the local hospital in St. Anthony. Her precise position was never broadly disclosed. She was not a public figure. She was simply woven into the town's everyday routine, someone who went to work, checked on her elderly father, and returned home to her children. That was precisely how the people around her consistently portrayed and remembered her. Family-centered, caring, humorous, and so well regarded that when investigators later made inquiries, nobody, not a single person, could identify an enemy she had. Her friend Gina Elliott said it plainly. Jennifer would never have left her daughters behind, and if anything had been wrong, she would have called. For much of their marriage, that was the entire picture. A working mother, a fisherman husband who knew the shoreline and forests around Northwest Arm like the back of his hand. 2 daughters growing up in a small community. Yet somewhere along the way, that picture began to shift. By 2016, after 18 years together, Jennifer no longer loved Dean. She wanted to leave, and she was no longer merely considering the possibility. She was taking steps toward it. That same year delivered another loss. In the fall of 2016, Jennifer's mother died. So, while privately mourning, she was also separating from her husband, consulting an attorney, leaving the marital home on Husky Drive, and staying with her father, Alan, in St. Lunaire, Grey Cay. She started exploring employment in Glovertown, a community much closer to where her eldest daughter, Marina, lived. She wanted to be close to her. According to people close to her, she had a job interview arranged there. This was not a woman drifting without direction. This was someone constructing an exit plan carefully, one piece at a time. Yet as the separation progressed, something else was developing beside it: fear. Friends and relatives said Jennifer had become frightened of Dean during this period. He reportedly started appearing near her workplace around the time her shifts finished. He suspected she was communicating with another man, although, according to people close to her, much of that contact concerned lawyers and the practical process of ending a marriage. Jennifer's fear became serious enough that she and her friends discreetly created an informal check-in arrangement, regular calls and texts, so that someone always knew she was safe and accounted for. On November 16, 2016, precisely 2 weeks before she disappeared, Jennifer made a choice her family would later consider highly significant. She changed the beneficiary of her life insurance policy, removing Dean and naming her 2 daughters instead. That was the situation during the final week of November 2016. Jennifer was working, mourning her mother, visiting her father, preparing to leave a small town where everyone knew her affairs, and trying to create a new life closer to Marina. Then came one last, ordinary-sounding arrangement that would bring her back inside the house she had been trying to leave. Dean arranged days of duck hunting at a cabin 45 minutes away near Northwest Arm. The couple's daughter, Dina, wanted to remain at the Husky Drive home since it was nearer to her school. Jennifer and Dean agreed. With Dean supposedly staying at the cabin, Jennifer would spend the night at the family house so Dina would not be by herself. According to those who knew, Jennifer wasn't happy about the arrangement. She no longer felt secure inside that house. Still, she accepted it on the condition that Dean remain at the cabin. That takes us to November 30th, 2016, the last day anyone reliably saw Jennifer Hilliard, Penny. She went to work as usual that day. That evening, she ate dinner at her father's home with several relatives, among them her sister Yvonne. At approximately 6 p.m., she drove Yvonne to a hospital appointment in St. Anthony. During the trip, Dean phoned and asked when she expected to return home. She said she was heading back. She wasn't feeling well. A headache was bothering her, and she intended to lie down after reaching the house. Around 8:12 p.m., Jennifer sent her daughter Dina a text saying she was home, wasn't feeling well, and planned either to take a bath or go to bed. Dina had been out with friends and didn't return until after curfew, around 9:30 p.m. or later. As she entered, she encountered her father, Dean, who said he had returned from the cabin because he had forgotten his duck decoys in the garage. He departed again not long afterward. Concerned about getting in trouble for coming home late, Dina slipped quietly into her room. Jennifer's bedroom door remained shut. Dina did not open it. She never saw her mother that evening. The following morning, December 1st, at about 7 a.m., Jennifer's phone alarm began ringing and continued to ring. Dina went to investigate, but Jennifer was gone. Instead, she discovered every indication of a woman who had not willingly walked away. The phone was still ringing. The purse remained untouched. Her coat and shoes were where they belonged. So was the passport. Outside, the car was parked with the keys reportedly left inside or nearby. There was no note. No message had been sent to anyone. She had not gone to work, and she had not contacted her father, siblings, or friends. For someone whose loved ones checked on her every day because she was frightened, that sudden silence was immediately alarming. Police were contacted that day, but during the initial phase, the RCMP treated the matter mainly as a missing person investigation instead of a crime scene involving wooded areas and nearby water. It would take roughly a week, until December 7th, before police officially classified the disappearance as suspicious and started treating the Husky Drive property as a possible crime scene. By that stage, Jennifer's family said numerous people, including friends, relatives, and volunteers, had already moved through the house, potentially disturbing any evidence that might have remained. A subsequent forensic examination reportedly uncovered no clear indications of a violent confrontation. There was significant visible blood, which only made the case more difficult to establish without additional evidence. Yet investigators still lacked evidence to determine exactly what had happened inside the home that night. What came next was an enormous prolonged search operation. RCMP officers, Canadian Rangers, search and rescue volunteers, divers, boats, and even a helicopter searched the land and coastal waters surrounding St. Anthony. The community responded in force. Local residents collected around $2,500 through a bingo fundraiser specifically intended to pay for sonar searches beneath the water. Posters, billboards, and car magnets displaying Jennifer's photographs spread throughout the region. Balloon releases and vigils took place at Fishing Point Park. Dean's mother, Ruby Penny, openly stood behind her son and offered a $25 reward for information, while at one point also directing suspicion toward another local man, Derek Hillier. Yet, despite the enormous effort, Jennifer's whereabouts remained unknown. Investigators eventually spoke with more than 100 people. CBC's investigative program, The Fifth Estate, broadcast a two-part feature about the case, drawing national attention and examining contradictions in Dean's account, especially his explanation for returning to retrieve forgotten decoys. Still, for years, police repeated the same public message. The investigation remained active, and someone likely knew more than they had revealed. Beneath that public silence, however, something far larger was slowly developing. A missing person case without a body or signs of forced entry required what conventional forensic work could not provide: a confession. Then, in September 2019, an undercover RCMP officer named Vic approached Dean, initially pretending to be interested in renting his hunting cabin. That initial exchange became the first step in what would eventually be one of the province's biggest and costliest undercover operations, a classic Canadian Mr. Big Sting. For roughly 4 years, officers gradually constructed a fictional criminal organisation around Dean, offering him lucrative employment, travel, valuable property, and assurances of protection from police trouble, while secretly assessing whether he would ultimately reveal the truth about what had happened to his wife. By the operation's conclusion, around 100 RCMP personnel serving in various roles had participated. Across those 4 years, Dean was slowly and steadily drawn further into the operation. He met men who portrayed themselves as connected, rich, and dangerous. He was shown property, travel, and the image of a criminal network functioning openly and quietly throughout the country. For a man who, according to his later testimony, was under financial strain, it must have seemed like a possible escape from his growing troubles. A world entirely different from the one he actually knew, living on fishing income in a small Newfoundland town. The operation eventually and deliberately led to a meeting with a supposed crime boss called Rudy. One especially crucial encounter took place aboard a yacht in a Vancouver marina on November 30th, 2023, precisely the 7th anniversary of Jennifer's disappearance. Dean, thinking he was under consideration for a lucrative position as a yacht captain, was confronted at that meeting with a fabricated document indicating police were preparing to arrest him, and was told that revealing the truth to Rudy was the only way the organisation could assist him. That night, following hours of discussion, Dean delivered his first detailed and extensive version of what had happened to Jennifer. He said he had entered the Husky Drive house that night to retrieve his duck decoys, that Jennifer awakened, that they ended up beside the stairs near the garage, and that he pushed her, making her fall and strike her head. He said he checked her pulse, believed she was dead, then described cleaning the area, wrapping her body, and concealing it inside a duck decoy bag. He said he intentionally stopped at a gas station later that night, so security cameras would make his trip back toward the cabin appear normal. He described carrying her to the water near Northwest Arm and placing her in the ocean in a section roughly 80 to 100 feet deep. During a later recorded conversation, his story became even worse. Dean added that after Jennifer fell and struck her head, he hit her several times with a mallet-like hammer, specifically to ensure she would not wake again. That one detail changed the account from an accidental fall, followed by a cover-up, into a deliberate, intentional homicide. 2 weeks later, on December 15, 2023, the RCMP arrested Dean Penny in the Deer Lake area. The following day, he was formally charged with the first-degree murder of Jennifer Hillier Penny. Police publicly characterised it as intimate partner violence, confirmed that her remains had still not been found, and disclosed little more as the case continued to proceed through the courts. The trial eventually opened on April 1st, 2026, at the Supreme Court of Newfoundland and Labrador in Corner Brook, before a 12-person jury. Dean pleaded not guilty. During the weeks that followed, the Crown constructed its case around the separation timeline, Jennifer's documented fear of Dean, his presence inside the house that night, the belongings left behind, the gas station stop, and at the very centre of it all, the two undercover confessions. The defence focused on challenging the credibility of those same confessions. Dean took the witness stand for his defence and testified that he had never murdered Jennifer at all, that everything he told the undercover crime boss was fabricated, a desperate act by a financially troubled man who believed his freedom and a small fortune rested on providing Rudy's organisation with a story convincing enough to accept. His attorneys also directed the jury toward Derek Hillier as another suspect, although Derek's family firmly and repeatedly denied involvement, and he had died before the trial, meaning he could never answer the accusation himself. The jury also heard from Jennifer's oldest daughter, Marina, who testified that her mother planned to leave St. Anthony and had told her she feared her father, although Marina made clear she had never personally witnessed physical violence between her parents. A neighbour named Morley Hillier testified that Dean had made a disturbing remark weeks before the disappearance, suggesting Jennifer would disappear and her family would be left with nothing. The defence strongly and repeatedly challenged that testimony, questioning the witness's memory, his background, and his credibility while testifying. Investigators also described checking portions of Dean's story against facts that could actually be confirmed. Surveillance footage showed him at a St. Anthony gas station that night, and his own daughter confirmed she had seen him at the house. Those details supported parts of his route without independently proving what had occurred inside those walls. Jury deliberations continued for several long days. At one stage, jurors asked to watch the unedited undercover recordings again and sought clarification from the judge, Justice Vikas Kalra, regarding the legal meaning of coercion in an undercover sting. The judge explained the standard and deliberations resumed. Finally, on Sunday, May 24, 2026, nearly 10 years after Jennifer vanished, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Dean's claim that the confession had been fabricated through coercion had failed to create reasonable doubt. RCMP Inspector Adam Palmer publicly thanked investigators and Jennifer's family while recognising the case's one enduring and painful gap. Her body has still not been found. Dean's sentencing hearing is scheduled for September 11th, 2026 in Corner Brook, where Jennifer's family is expected to present victim impact statements under Canadian law. A first-degree murder conviction means a mandatory life sentence, with no opportunity even to seek parole for 25 years. Even after that point, being eligible to apply does not mean release is assured. At present, no appeal has been publicly filed. Forensic analysis. Forensically, what makes this case unusual is the evidence investigators never had. No visible blood at the scene indicated a violent struggle. No confirmed murder weapon was ever recovered, and nearly 10 years later, there is still no body. Testing in the garage raised questions about possible stains, but it never conclusively established that they were blood. Although Jennifer's DNA was reportedly found there, she lived in the house and used the garage, meaning its evidentiary value was limited. In a case such as this, physical evidence simply could not support the prosecution by itself. That is exactly why the undercover operation became central to the case. RCMP teams carried out 6 separate searches and examined more than 130 underwater locations around the Hare Bay Islands, using the location Dean identified during his confession, but found nothing. The Crown argued that almost a decade spent in cold, deep, moving Atlantic water could readily explain why no remains were recovered. The defence said the reverse. They argued that repeated searches producing nothing weakened the reliability of the very confession on which the case largely rested. That confession also exists within one of the most examined investigative techniques under Canadian law. Under the Supreme Court's ruling, statements obtained through a Mr. Big operation are presumed unreliable unless the Crown demonstrates that they are trustworthy and that their evidentiary value outweighs the danger of convicting someone for a performance intended to impress fake criminals. That is precisely why jurors spent days reviewing those recordings and asking the judge to explain coercion before reaching their verdict. Psychological analysis. From a psychological perspective, this case reaches the most dangerous stage of an abusive or controlling relationship: separation. Statistically, the period when a victim is actively leaving or has recently left remains the highest risk window for lethal violence. Control that once seemed complete is suddenly slipping away. Every part of Jennifer's final weeks fits that pattern. The lawyer, moving out, searching for work near her daughter, changing the beneficiary, and creating an informal safety network with friends because she was frightened. On Dean's side, without assigning him any diagnosis he has not received, his recorded statements to undercover officers show someone capable of prolonged, deliberate deception. Not merely on the night Jennifer disappeared, but throughout the years that followed, preserving a public image of innocence while allowing his mother to raise money and campaign for him, all while privately telling a very different story to men he believed were criminals. The distance between that public performance and private confession is chilling by itself. It also helps explain why his argument that the confession was simply another performance was always likely to be difficult for a jury to accept. Personal opinion. What remains with me most about this case is this: Jennifer did not disappear during a moment of uncertainty or hesitation. She vanished while actively and deliberately constructing her escape. The job search, the lawyer, the insurance change 2 weeks earlier. She was not a woman who simply vanished. She was a woman who was leaving and was stopped. What troubles me most is how completely ordinary that final night appeared from the outside. A husband forgetting his decoys. A daughter quietly slipping into bed so she would not get in trouble for breaking curfew. No one inside that house that night had any reason to think it would be their last time together. If you have ever experienced that instinct, that quiet, persistent feeling that someone in your life may not be safe to be around, I want you to consider how seriously Jennifer's friends treated that feeling, and how, even with a check-in system, even with a plan, it still was not enough. That was not her failure. That is simply how narrow the margin can be. Jennifer's body has still never been found. Her family is still waiting for her, and waiting for whatever truth Dean may still have left to tell.